Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to see me. It's much appreciated. I note that you haven't been to see us for a while, but of course, with the battle and all, it's very nice of you to drop in, considering there's so much dropping off you. Well, as you can see, we're wonderfully well equipped here, and this is just my last satisfied customer. Now, as you can see, we've got a patient on the table. You might just be able to see his feet. You don't want to see his face. It's quite disgusting. But what we're going to be doing to this chap, he's got some arrows in him. Now, I've already managed to extract one, and here it is. Here's a little beggar sitting down there. You can probably see that. It was quite tricky, really, to get that out. We managed to get most of the shaft out, first of all. That's now burnt. We put that on the fire. But what I managed to do in order to waggle it about was I had my delightful extractors like these, and I was able to slot it into the person's wound and get this right into the socket of the arrow, and then I managed to grasp hold of that so it was nice and tight. Unfortunately for the poor gentleman, it was stuck in his bone, so I had to waggle it about a bit and then turn it and ease it out, and eventually the whole thing was able to come out with relative ease. So yeah, it just slotted out and out it came. So fortunately that wasn't too bad. We had a customer the other day who acquired, shall we say, one of these barbed arrows inside of his stomach. And what we did with that, in fact, this is the part of the arrow that once belonged to that very arrowhead. We had to chop the end of that off. And then, well, if I give you a demonstration with this, if you imagine this is his stomach here, in fact, no, I can do it on myself, can't I? So it was sort of about here on the side of his stomach, and then what we did is after we broke the end off, we shoved it all the way through and sort of pushed it through like this. This is obviously a lot quieter, he was screaming quite a bit, and then we managed to pull it out through his back. Because obviously a barbed arrow, this one's a slightly larger one to give you an idea, but you can see these delightful spikes here. If you pull it, you pull your insides out, which obviously tends to kill the patient. So that's why we have to push it all the way through and extract it through the back. But of course the problem is when you have so many people left lying about, because there's only one of me, and obviously after a battle there are so many casualties. One of the big problems, of course, is infection. And sadly for a chap the other day, he'd got infected in his leg, and it was an arrow. We managed to get the arrow out, but the mortification of the flesh, gangrene as you know it, was really starting to set in quite badly. It was okay because we amputated it, and he's now known as Stumpy. And what we did is, first of all, we've got a piece of leather like this, and we made him stick this in his mouth like that and bite down on it for the pain, because obviously when you're in pain you grit your teeth, and what can happen is you can bite off the end of your own tongue, which is quite useful if you're a talkative person for everybody else, but sadly it's not very good for everyday conversation. So we managed to shove that in his mouth, and then I had some of my assistants holding him down, because obviously if he's wide awake he tends to wriggle about, and he might lose something that he doesn't want to lose. So what we then do is get a piece of leather like this to use as a tourniquet and really tie that. Say for example, if I just demonstrate a little bit of my arm, tie it really tight so that when you cut in he doesn't leak too much blood all over the place, because obviously that can kill the patient as well. Once we did that, we then took an amputation knife to his leg. Now this in here, this needs sharpening up. I've had much use of this recently, and as such it got a little bit blunt. But this would be absolutely razor sharp normally, and what we do is over the limb, we grab hold of it like this and go right the way round, all the way round. And as we do that, we're cutting through constantly at an angle. So once you've done a couple of rotations, you're right the way down to the bone. Now, unfortunately, my boning saw, this one here, it hasn't got an extra handle, so consequently it's an old one now, and I have to sort of snag it across the bone like that, which of course normally means that it will shatter and you end up with these really difficult shards. If that happens, once the limb has been removed, we can cut those off quite easily. We'll chisel them down or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's off. And then of course the problem with this chap at the end of his leg is that he's got all these dangly bits coming out the end, all these blood vessels and things like that. So the only way that we can deal with that is to get a very large one of these, which is a cauterizing iron, and this has been heating up in a nice fire, and then we burn his stump shut, and that's sealed up then, and then he's free to go. Yeah, it's a fairly straightforward process. I mean, he's got a good chance of survival as well. You're looking at about, I don't know, 17 out of every 100 people will walk away from this. Well, in this particular chap's case, hop away from this, but nevertheless, you know what I mean. Yes, it's not too bad at all. We normally do cauterizing as well for those little arrowhead wounds, the little puncture wounds that they create. It's very difficult to stitch up, so little cauterizing iron there. If, of course, it was one of those that was stuck in you, well, if it was in an arm or a leg, that's not a problem because I have these two delightful probes. But my assistant, what he can do is he can use the hooks at the other end. He sticks those down into the hole and then pulls open the wound so I can get a pair of extractors down. So yeah, whilst on the subject of extractors, actually, we should talk about the removal of teeth. Now, we've got some teeth down here. You might notice this little one here. This was from a child. There's plenty to grab hold of, you see, because one of the problems is diet. And what can happen, the older you get, obviously, you've been eating a lot of bread in your life, it's one of the staple diets, and the problem with eating bread is that when it's ground down in the mill, it doesn't just grind the corn to make flour, it also grinds some of the stone down as well. So you've got bits of grit in there, and then when you take the flour to the baker to have it baked into your nice loaf, they usually add chalk to the mix. Just to make it go a bit further. So consequently, you've got gritty chalk in there, and then it's very difficult to get teeth out, and as such, you end up with fragments of teeth. So here are some, earlier on, I don't know maybe if you can see them here. If you have a look at those, can you see those? So bits of tooth that I've ripped out rather than the whole lot, which is incredibly painful, but of course we do our best. And once we've ripped your teeth out, oil of cloves is very good for the pain, if nothing else. So, if you imagine this is your soft, squidgy jawbone, if only it was that soft and squidgy, what we do is get the extractors, we grab hold of your tooth, and we actually push it further down into the jawbone first of all, and then release it. Do that a few times, and as it pops up, it will start to loosen. We'll then go down to the left and to the right, and then what we'll do then is we'll start to circle it round gradually, and then it's quite easy then to try and pull it out. What we do, if it was on the bottom, for example, is we'd actually use your own jaw as a lever. So when it goes in, and slots it out quite easily, and then you'd be free to go from that one as well. So, lots of delightful ways to try and assist you. But of course, if you're not looking for something quite as drastic, then maybe just feeling under the weather, a simple bloodletting is very, very simple. Now, I don't know if you can see perhaps in here, this is someone from earlier on today. They've only had a little puddle of blood. Now, I have here a bloodletting chart. Let's have a look at that there. Now, you'll notice there's loads of arrows corresponding to different parts of the body. That's where you leak best from. And I can do it in a couple of ways. I have something here called a flea, okay? And with a nice sharp bit there, we find a convenient vein. And once we've done that, we hit it very hard, and then you can drip for a bit. Obviously, people's more preferred choice, though, is the leech over here. Come on, up you come. You might be able to see him just there. And then what we do is we stick it down onto the bit of skin, and he'll suck for a bit, get slightly fatter, fill up with blood, release your toxins, and then what will happen, of course, is that will rebalance your humours. So I've got a bit of a humour chart here. So there we go, and you should feel much better in a few days or so. If not, do come back to us. There's no waiting times, but you will have to pay.